Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
With Biden, and, Biden's got his hand on his shoulder. I mean, these two guys are meant to be together, a sniffomaniac and a walking bag of cocaine. It's just like saying these things out loud causes an avalanche of condemnation to rain down on you when everyone knows that it's true. Everyone knows that what Hunter Biden was up to over there was not good stuff. Not good stuff. And instead of coming to terms with the actual form of rule that is being imposed on us and others around the world by the quote unquote rules-based international order, we have to spray this fantasy over everything and then police, people who are insufficient in their enthusiasm. Their rictus grin is not wide enough. And then they are put under suspicion and have aspersions cast at them. It's disgraceful and it's shameful. And the kink is part of the regime. The reason why, the more unnatural and artificial your perversity is, the higher you seem to rise in the regime, is because this is the new model. It's going to be okay because the technology makes up for the difference.
Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor at the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. Our more audio-sensitive listeners will be able to tell I am not using my usual microphone, and that is because I'm having the most 21st century problem I think I've ever had, which is that my automatic lock on my door is malfunctioning. I'm locked out of my house, but nor sleet, nor snow, nor hail, nor bots will keep me from delivering this podcast to you. I'm out in my car, so please forgive the bad audio. I am joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron, editor James Poulos, and publisher and president Ryan Williams. And we have made it through another year, folks. It's always, to me, wild to reflect on the speed with which the episodes of this podcast just flip by. It's like one of those montages in an old movie where the days on the calendar get torn off one by one. We've been doing this for a while now, and it is our custom at the end of each year to take stock a little bit and look back not only on the year itself, but on what the prognosis is for the year ahead, because we're not going anywhere, much as the libs might like us to. So we're going to do a few things to kind of, look at the year in review. And I've asked the guys to do a little homework in preparation for this, which is to say, I wanted, first of all, to talk about everybody's, I'm not going to say favorite piece on the site, because that's not quite what I mean. I wanted people to go away and think about, over the course of this year, of all the things we've published, is there anything that just sticks in your craw, something that you can't get off your mind, something that changed the way you look at a certain issue, or something that you refer people back to a lot? And I thought that would be a good way of looking back on what we've done for this year before we, pull back the camera and talk a little bit about how the year has unfolded more generally. So I think, despite the fact that I seized control of this podcast from him in un-American coup earlier this year, I'm going to start with the head honcho himself, publisher and president Ryan Williams. Ryan, what's a piece from the site that you can't get off your mind?
Thanks, Spencer. Well, mine's sort of a nostalgia pick, and it runs us back into 2021 and really back to the beginnings of the Institute. And so that is Angelo Codevilla's piece from the spring, which we published posthumously, called "What is Russia to Us?" This is a bit, right at the beginning of the Ukraine war. This was an excerpt from Angelo's book called America's Rise and Fall Among Nations, Lessons in Statecraft from John Quincy Adams, which was, I think I've said this on here before, it's just interesting how these things work out. It was originally a memo that was requested by the Office of Net Assessment in Donald Trump's Defense Department. Kind of, one of the little organs in the defense or state or diplomatic bureaucracy. There's a few of these that are kind of like little think tanks and big ideas places. So they commission outside stuff often, and they pay you for it, usually decently well. So they asked Angelo for what is an America First foreign policy? And Angelo, being Angelo, about 4 or 5 months later, he handed them a draft, which was 60,000 or so words, the first 2/3 of which were, what would John Quincy Adams do? And we pulled a piece of that out in order to help people think through the Ukraine-Russia question. And I just love the piece because I miss Angelo, of course. I want his counsel these days as our defense establishment and really the establishment of both parties. The latest omnibus vote for $47 billion to Ukraine being prime example just seems to kind of continue to rush headlong into what many of us think is an ill-advised adventure, and a provocative one at that. And something that Angelo would have called Ukraine in that piece. I mean, Ukraine is strategically interesting to us. It's strategically important to us because it's kind of at the crossroads of Europe. But we really don't have the means of securing its own independence against its large neighbor, Russia, because of reasons of geography and supply chains and strategic nuclear questions and all the rest. So Angelo counseled in that piece. And of course, this was long. He died, unfortunately, last fall, a bit suddenly before the war. So we published this as just an example of his prescience and understanding of the region and the geography and the competing interests. And so I often find myself thinking of that piece, just as I've used Angelo really as one of our touchstones in thinking about foreign policy more generally over the last few decades. Angelo was one of these folks who, writing for the Claremont Review books, most prominently starting from its beginning, expressed some great skepticism of various aspects of bipartisan foreign policy over in the basically post-Cold War era, and had equal disdain and criticism for both the establishment Republican foreign policy and the establishment Democratic foreign policy, and which he had long argued, really our whole establishment had the same foreign policy pretty much since the rise of progressivism and the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, with a brief little flare-up of, Mr. Republican Robert Taft holding out with an older view, but it really got squelched for the most part, and then really was dead after World War II. And his point is that our foreign policy now is progressive. It has been since the progressive era. We sort of trade turns in the major parties' establishments, doing various forms of moral and physical imperialism, which is antithetical to, say, the foreign policy of and the diplomatic sobriety of John Quincy Adams. So Angelo's piece, not that long from the spring, brings a lot of that out nicely. And, a few details are off because he wasn't here to see the invasion of Ukraine, but it's pretty spot on in helping us think through these things. And it's stuck with me also because I miss the old man. So yeah, it bears rereading, and I did today.
Yeah, Angelo's loss, such a blow for so many reasons, chief among them, or at least one of the chief among them being that I can't count the number of times this year that at a CRB meeting or an American Mind meeting, just something has happened and we've thought, who's the person to give us insight into this? It's Angelo Codevilla, and we can't reach out to him anymore. And so we're lucky, I think, that he was such a prolific writer, because we do have a lot that is still incredibly prescient and is holding up really well. That's a good example, that piece of real insight into the bigger picture of these sort of things without piety. He was known for his disregard for the pieties that were supposed to be kind of sacrosanct. And I have that same feeling of just really wishing we could get more guidance from him.
I'll use it as the opportunity to shill. Regnery has reached out maybe 8 months ago or so and asked if we wanted to pair up with them to re-release a new and anniversary or beautiful edition. I don't know if it's quite the anniversary of anything of Angelo's great essay, The Ruling Class, which originally appeared in the American Spectator. So that should be out in bookstores and on Amazon soon. There's been a couple delays, but keep an eye out for that. It's got a new preface or foreword by Mike Anton, so a fitting tribute. that essay is Angelo being as prescient about domestic things as he was often with foreign policy things. So keep an eye out for it.
His piece on TAM, the abolish FISA and the CIA, is another one that I come back to a lot. But let me toss it over to James. James, what have you got for us?
Well, it's been quite a year, and if there's one subhead in one American Mind piece that sums it all up for me, it is the subhead in Mike Anton's February 28th, 2022 essay called "Everything is Fine." Narrator, everything was not fine. The subhead in question is simply this: our intelligence community is all the community we need. The whole piece is dripping with irony in the wake of the Canadian truckers being financially zeroed out and basically just, crushed in all but the most literal sense by the Trudeau regime. And we have seen just how much of a community the intelligence community has been since that week. I hesitate to say with no end in sight because things are still TBD in Twitter world, but the rot is deep and the mask is coming off. Americans have been treated to a peek behind the curtain. I'm just going to use all of my metaphors in one comment here today. And what they see is that big tech and the deep state are functioning as a single entity, and that it is this entity that is in fact the regime. This is the new regime. This is the mode of governance the regime uses. And gosh darn it, it's just not America. I mean, it's certainly not our constitutionally guaranteed form of government. It is totally out of sync with our very long, traditionally shared way of life, regardless of all of the sectional and other differences that Americans have cultivated and squabbled over the centuries. And increasingly, it is at odds with our humanity itself. So, in addition to all those things, is this really community? Perhaps not. Perhaps not. And perhaps the intelligence community is not best described as a community itself. And, perhaps after all, that it's not very intelligent. I mean, you can laugh and everything, but like all of these advocates of quote unquote smart power, it's not working very well. It's working to increase their power, and it's working to damage their enemies. But beyond that, it hasn't proved to achieve what it was ostensibly activated in order to achieve, which was to lay some foundations of consensus and stability that were deeply in tune with America as we've known it, rather than marking a fundamental break from which there's no intended return. Disagreements will no doubt continue as to how deep the rot runs backward in historical time. We will continue to make varying claims about where things really went off the tracks. But at the end of the day, America is a large commercial republic, and that's what it was from the beginning, and that's what the founders understood had to be the case in order for things to function. You got to make sure that your regime reflects the people who are actually in your territory. And despite the fact that many millions of Americans seem willing or maybe unable to stop themselves from being onboarded into this new regime, an equal, if not larger, share of Americans are without illusions as to just how radically opposed this enforced and compulsory community really is to the country in which we all live.
It's been interesting to me to watch as the Twitter files roll out, the tight link between the FBI and these massive corporations. It comes as a shock to a certain class of people. I can't believe that they're, this closely intertwined. And yeah, if you've been reading our site for a while, this will not come as a surprise to you. And not only will it not come as a surprise, it won't even look like the tip of the iceberg. Like, people think that the kerfuffle over Twitter is about like which journalists are going to get to lay down fire tweets. But of course, it's not that at all. It's like a way into people seeing that, in fact, these institutions have become hard. I don't know. I think it's hard for people. Another piece that we ran that was based on a Twitter thread is Daryl Cooper's disillusionment of the deplorables. He just talks about how hard it is for people to come to terms with the idea that these American institutions that have been coded red for so long are themselves kind of the problem. But that Anton piece, James, is a good route into it, as good a route into it as any I know of. Seth, what's your pick?
Well, there's a piece that, at the time it came out, it seemed fine, but I have returned to it a bunch of times because, one, it's just like this terrific, it just, if you want like a rehash of the chronology of basically Trump derangement syndrome, this item by Ed Erler, which we published in February, early February, Why They Can't Make Trump Go Away. It's a pretty long piece, but he just does this phenomenal job of, essentially going through the two impeachments. But the way he sets it up, it's just, he really explains how, he sets the scene that, essentially we had this up through 2016, there was this consensus about what the country was supposed to be doing and the direction it was headed, this kind of scientific approach to democracy that goes back to like, Edward Bernays or whoever back in, the progressive era. And everything was supposed to be managed and manageable. And Trump represented this eruption like a bad dose of acne. And, I mean that in a good way, where, popular sentiment kind of broke through. And this was just so intolerable that it had to be like fought. And he goes through the two impeachments and all of the like crazy lies, and then the beginning of the Biden administration with Ukraine. And it's amazing because we see that it's all, he very much like laid out how things had gone up to that point. And then really, basically you can sort of extrapolate and you see exactly why we're at where we are now, where, the Congress with this absurd January 6th commission is now, preparing to indict a former president for, sedition and insurrection over the most, absurd, tendentious, tenuous kind of evidence. It's also very beautifully written. He says here, it is necessary for politicians in an oligarchy masquerading as a democracy to speak the language of the people and express interest in their concerns, whether they consider those concerns real or imagined. I just really enjoy this piece. So I would say that this Ed Erler piece is definitely worth returning to. And, it's a real guide to where we're headed, I think.
Yeah, I'll preview something for the new year by saying that, we'll be running some pieces on the lay of the land as we approach 2024 when the new year drops, these pieces will start dropping. And that Erler theme comes up again in some of these pieces that I'm editing now, that, what is the fundamental concern? Well, it's not over. It wasn't over when Trump lost in 2020. It wasn't over. Like, there was no point at which that fight got resolved. It has just been kind of sublimated in all of these ways. And I think, that piece helps to show why it's so much deeper and bigger than like, ooh, bad orange man wins election in 2016, or even than like hypocritical liberal media tells lies. Like, there is an attack being made or a threat in Trump to the fundaments of, how progressive governance was supposed to work since Wilson. Yeah, that's a great piece. Because in my capacity as features editor, I felt obligated to resurrect a piece from a feature somewhere. So that's what I've done. I think we've gotten a lot of great submissions this year. There's a piece from early in the year, and it's in a feature that is on a kind of touchy subject, and the piece itself is on a touchy subject within the touchy subject. And that is Dave Raboy's piece, The Unbearable Whiteness of Jews, for the Great Replacement feature. And this is a time, this topic obviously is one of the kind of nuclear topics that if you raise it, you either have to condemn it outright as a baseless conspiracy theory, or you are going to be kind of lumped in among the worst of the worst. And, that pressure has gotten, I think, only more intense as some of the more indeed unsavory aspects of, I won't even call it the right, because I don't think they really belong with us, but the Kanye kerfuffle that happened earlier, it's like now it's so touchy to even start mentioning this. But basically Dave's point, and Dave himself is Jewish, and he's writing about the debate that exists very much, it's still alive on the left, over whether Jews are white. And it's one of these things that's like they can talk about it, but you can't talk about it if you acknowledge this question. But it's basically, if Jews are white, that is, if they are coded as kind of mainstream in American society, then they are fit objects of discrimination in the woke racial regime. And therefore, concerns of anti-Semitism maybe have to take a back seat to accusations of racism or privilege or whatever else. And, the kind of mainstream, unthinking, reflexive version of this is the famous Whoopi Goldberg gaffe, in which she says, the Holocaust wasn't about race, right? Because Jews don't count as a race, And so Raboy is just making the point in this piece, and Seth, you have a piece in the same feature that takes this, I think, further as well, that Raboy is making the point that, the racialization of all things is not going to be good for the Jews, and it is mistaken for Jewish people, if they feel inclined, out of sort of liberal fealty to align with this whole white privilege thing. This is not like a good look for any political party, but it is especially something with which Jewish people should be deeply uncomfortable. Raboy writes, if Jews are white as defined by woke racialists, then we are very white indeed. It doesn't take much to realize that Jews are overrepresented nearly everywhere at American society's top rung, in media, finance, education, the arts, science, medicine, and politics. It is a curious and unseemly fact of Jewish life that we are encouraged to take pride in our accomplishments while ruthlessly attacking those outside our community who notice them. I mean, I don't think this point is limited to the question of anti-Semitism. I think it is part and parcel of how woke racialism works to kind of define just, good, hearty, healthy American meritocratic virtues and ideals as white and therefore evil and satanic, and to place any person in any kind of minority group, which is basically everybody, if you slice the minority groups up small enough, to place you in this terrible double bind where, you want to succeed and you want to do well, but to do so is to become white, and to become white is to become, reviled. And certainly to think, in terms that are not defined by race is to be, buying into whiteness in this abstract sense. I don't know. It's just it's a good piece, and it's a good issue for thinking through, why this supposedly virtuous kind of racial essentialism that has become the order of the day on the left is not even remotely virtuous, and is in fact, just the old garden variety form of racism, or at least always cashes out. Will always cash out in terms of the old and oldest forms of hatred, tribalism, and animosity. So that's my pick. I really liked that piece, and I thought it was a daring and interesting argument to be making. So in the next few minutes here, I thought we'd pull back from our site and stop log rolling and just talk a little bit about events from the past year that have stuck in our minds. This is, again, just as the pieces we cited were not going to be the best piece on the site or whatever. This is not the most important thing that happened in 2022 or whatever, although if you want to make a case for that, go right ahead. But this is just any news cycle, any news event that really sat with you as indicative of some deeper trend or significant in some way that maybe was profound beyond its supposed significance in the actual news cycle. I'm interested to hear what you guys have kind of come back to over the year as significant or meaningful. Ryan, we'll start with you again.
Mine's sort of an aggregate take, which is, and it's sort of an external and an internal component. But I've been struck at how quickly it was sort of trending, I suppose, in recent years, but it seems to just have accelerated. And maybe it wasn't just this year, but it's really been the first 2 years of the Biden administration. The extent to which I'm supposed to think it's normal, defensible, and has kind of like always been a part of life that we have these sexual deviants and freaks working in our federal government. Now, I'm most recently referring to Sam Brinton, of course, who was recently fired from Biden's Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I think, or he's in the Office of Nuclear Energy at the, anyway, it doesn't matter, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition. So Brinton was recently caught stealing luggage, not once, but at least twice. And the man is striking looking. He has kind of a very shaved head, a mustache, and is often, though he wasn't in the videos where he's stealing luggage, often dressed like a woman with heels and everything and bright red lipstick. Often, some people have probably seen his mugshot. Government profile shot when he was much in the news. It also came out that he, his personal life had some kinks in it, to say the least. He was engaged in a fetish involving him and some men pretending to be dogs. I will just stop there. This is a family podcast. And then all the way up to, what's her name? Rachel Levine, our undersecretary or whatever she is for Health and Human Services.
Man of the Year, Rachel Levine.
Man of the Year, Rachel Levine. Our friend and frequent faculty member, Brad Watson, liked to make the joke that he was so happy that Biden pulled Levine into the administration because prior to that, Watson lives in Pennsylvania. During COVID, he had to see Levine, a man dressed up like a woman, including with either a bad wig or pretty stringy, grown out long hair. I'm sure it's a wig, kind of, shaped like a linebacker, voice slightly pitched a little higher to sound more woman-like. Briefing Pennsylvanians on public health. Watson thought this was the great, darkly funny bit of irony. So he was happy the Biden administration brought Levine in. But this is just I wonder what percentage of the country, if you really got their true opinions, would think that this is just really weird and unserious and cannot portend good things for the future of America. I bet I would be surprised if it were under 85% of Americans. Now, there's a whole section of the U.S., especially elite U.S., on the left and center left, that know in their bones that it's bad manners and kind of low class in our current public morality to express anything but either a blasé attitude or a celebratory attitude to this sort of development. But, you wonder what, not even the founders, but you wonder what Bob McNamara would have thought of someone like Brinton or Levine, who, has been made an honorary military officer for some reason. I forget why. This is some tradition. And so, is also dressed up in a quasi uniform every day. It's just compounding the weirdness of the whole thing. But I was going to say, what would the founders have thought? We all know what they would have thought. But you don't even need to go back that far. I mean, heck, what let alone Bob McNamara. I mean, just go back to the George W. Bush administration or the first Obama administration. So the acceleration of this trend that is the kind of the old truth that dare not speak its name, that is, we're allowed to think this is absurd and gross and inappropriate. I've just been struck at how quickly this has all transpired. And then one wonders, too, what our foreign adversaries think of this sort of thing. I mean, Beijing must think it's hilarious and think, all they have to do is wait us out. I mean, we've addressed this theme before on this podcast. Why would China rock the boat? I mean, we continue to pile on debt with this latest omnibus bill. We're going to be we're going to pass, I think, the World War II record as percentage of GDP. China can just sit back and I can't it's sort of a blend of your last question, Spencer, and then this follow up, which I just cannot get this out of my head, and I can't understand why it continues. Well, I can't understand why it continues. I just wonder what the shelf life on this type of absurdity is. But then you look at the late Roman Republic, and decadence can go pretty far.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to end yourself up in a position where the bad guys can say true things about America as part of their propaganda. And that seems to me to be the situation that we're in. It's like, with the Alex Dugans of the world and whatever, people think you're apologizing for them if you say, well, it is, we are handing them all of these, we're handing them a lot of good evidence with which to make their case that America is simply an exporter of decadence and decay. And, as you say, Ryan, we do know why this continues. It's sort of built in philosophically to the project of the people who are pushing it. But yeah, I mean, one wonders also to what extent your average American is being compelled into compliance, and to what extent this is actually like a pitch that's being made that people are buying into. I'm sort of the, in this respect at least, I'm of the late Roman Empire decline theory, that this is a matter of kind of complacency and listlessness rather than philosophical sign on. But it's hard to know if it makes much of a difference.
We don't yet have a horse as a senator, but we did get Fetterman last cycle. So we're sliding down the slope.
I just made reference to that horse. I can't remember where I was talking about that with somebody else, but yeah, exactly. It's like there's plenty further to go. Don't worry. This road goes deep and long, but hopefully we will not proceed down it, as I believe that there is reason to have that hope and to hold it out. Seth, why don't we move on to you?
Well, to me, I mean, I'm not really like a foreign policy guy per se, but the domestic response to the invasion of Ukraine seems to me to be like, I don't know, the highest we've come in America to like the moment in 1984 when Oceania declares war on East Asia, or, they switch sides. And all of a sudden, the country went through this massive pivot so that the only thing we cared about, the only thing of importance and significance to the American people, was the invasion of like a pseudo client klepto state that nobody really knew or cared very much about, which also turns out to have been the same country that Trump's first impeachment was, tied up in, and the president's son made millions of dollars from, and which the president himself had, monkeyed around with the, who their chief prosecutor is, essentially blackmailing them. The idea that this is the most, this is essentially so important to America and to Americans that the borders of Ukraine be inviolate at the same time that our borders are being overrun. There's complete denial about it. No one understands that we're seeing 250,000 people a month flood across the southern border, and we're spending tens of billions, who knows how many billions of dollars to, equip the Ukrainian army, which has, enormous Nazi, fascist elements in it. And amazingly, we've sort of strong-armed Europe into committing industrial suicide and starving and freezing itself, all to defend the nobility of this cause. I've just been amazed by it. And even our dear leader, Mitch McConnell, this week announcing, all the great success. There's this, this quote just tells me, he's like, it's really remarkable that with a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic-led House, we have achieved so many of our priorities, like the Republican priorities. Now, I mean, I don't really know exactly which priorities he's talking about, but I just don't think that like a $1.7 trillion. I mean, I'm sorry, this is not even this is just kind of like a stopgap. This is like an additional pot of money to spend. All this money for border security that cannot be spent on border security. The idea that our Republican leader is saying that, that Ukrainian defense of Ukraine is like the top priority for the Republican voter. I just can't even fathom that that's like remotely true. I don't know. The whole Ukraine thing just seems to be like really crazy and really criminal and dangerous. And that's pretty much it. It's just so weird that they managed to get everybody on board with this, and that there's some kind of heroism to our stance. That to me was like the big story of 2022.
Seth, do you kind of buy into or accept the argument that the COVID playbook was just sort of immediately repurposed for Ukraine, that there wasn't really enough juice left in the COVID tank to make that the distraction? And so, this thing came along at just the right moment, and all the same ideas were just applied.
Sure. Sure. I mean, it certainly seemed that way. I mean, they probably would have done it anyway, but, they had to keep that kind of hysteria and panic just rolling along. They just go back and forth. Okay, our democracy, our health, our Ukraine, our democracy, or health. It all. They'll bounce back and forth. It seems like COVID is going to come back in the news. Yeah, but certainly it's this media manipulation. Obviously, the Twitter files have exposed, as you mentioned, have exposed the. I mean, I was frankly somewhat surprised that the FBI was. I mean, they were so embedded in Twitter that they gave Twitter $3 million to cover the costs of having Twitter employees do FBI work. I mean, that's just so crazy. Using social media as part of official government propaganda. Yeah. Oh, sure. It all seems to flow seamlessly.
Yeah, I've been shocked by it too, Seth. I just wanted not to steal James's thunder, but I wanted to direct people to one of the more interesting analyses of this whole Ukraine business, and that is the role of the social media swarm and what it's played in all of this. I would just point people to a couple of interviews over the last 8 months or so that John Robb has done with our friend Daryl Cooper over at the Martyr Made podcast. And we don't need to lay it all out here, but Robb has been tracking all this for a long time, and he was struck at Ukraine was the real first emergence of the swarm, that is to say, this decentralized network of opinion that's shifting and mob-like and all that is on social media, and especially Twitter. It kind of taking on a life of its own and directing international foreign policy or Anglo foreign policy, where you had kind of organically and without anyone telling anyone to do it or any meetings, centralized meetings, social or civic or otherwise, you had basically an economic blockade through boycott of one of the great civilizations in world history, that is Russia, with Coca-Cola pulling out and all the rest. You had individual cancellations of ethnic Russians across the Anglosphere for doing nothing, just being Russian and being prominent, playing, whether it's ballet or piano concertos, the cancellation of Tchaikovsky, the banning of Dostoevsky, it's insane. But to understand it, I think a good place to start is with John Robb, who writes this great Substack called Global Guerrillas. I think it's just essential reading and essential listening to understand the weirdness of that, and it being a new facet of Anglosphere policy setting. And because of the nature of social media, it reverberates across the globe quickly. It's kind of frightening.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a meme because it's real. The replacement of the current thing with the new current thing is very Orwellian, as Seth is indicating. And yeah, there's a piece in one of the CRB's last couple issues called "Why Are We in Ukraine" by Chris Caldwell, which deals with some of these same issues and these new modes of warfare, which are effectively, digital, borderless, and and quote unquote soft. Although, of course, soft power very easily turns into hard power. James, we've prolonged your choice for a while now. So what's yours?
Well, I agree with Seth. I only wish that I could be shocked about all this. I mean, just the shabbiness of seeing the decadence and the criminality of this regime transformed through propaganda into something which we are supposed to be proud of. Look, no one wants Russia to invade America. No one wants China to destroy America from within. At least none of us on this podcast. But we are required to pretend that our president is a paragon of virtue. We are required to pretend that the president of Ukraine is not a puppet presiding over a client state. I mean, you look at these two guys as of recording today, as Zelensky shows up in the US and he's being paraded through Congress and doing the photo ops with Biden, and Biden's got his hand on his shoulder. I mean, these two guys are meant to be together, a sniffomaniac and a walking bag of cocaine. It's just like saying these things out loud causes an avalanche of condemnation to rain down on you when everyone knows that it's true. Everyone knows that what Hunter Biden was up to over there was not good stuff. And instead of coming to terms with the actual form of rule that is being imposed on us and others around the world by the quote unquote rules-based international order, we have to spray this fantasy over everything and then police, people who are insufficient in their enthusiasm. Their rictus grin is not wide enough. And then they are put under suspicion and have aspersions cast at them. It's disgraceful and it's shameful, and the kink is part of the regime. The reason why the more unnatural and artificial your perversity is, the higher you seem to rise in the regime, is because this is the new model. It's going to be okay because the technology makes up for the difference. In a regime where you don't have these automated simulators running all the time to keep everyone in order, yeah, you might actually need like competent, natural born sort of normal human beings running the show. But, as the meme that I'm circulating, where it's like the Borg from Star Trek, the Borg Queen, and then that sort of open source kaleidoscope of queerness flag thing that Microsoft put out, they're the same picture. It's the same thing. And unless we have some sitting officials who are willing to acknowledge this, and willing to present America with a genuine choice between regimes, between modes of governance over citizens and over our technology, then this thing is going to roll on. So, we put this up at the American Mind back in January of 22 of this year. My testimony on the Hill in front of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Senate. Senator Thune's guys were kind enough to have me come out and deliver some remarks, and they were extra kind to ask me to do what I wanted to do, which was talk about just how bad things can get if Congress continues to let the reins flap. And so I did, and I talked about how we needed over the year, I've talked about it as a Second Amendment for compute, or a Digital Rights Act, or a Digital Rights Amendment. It's all basically the same thing. It's implicit in the First and Second Amendments: free association, in addition to free speech, freedom from an established state religion, the right to keep and bear compute, high-powered GPUs, Bitcoin, other protocols. If we don't have those things, then the Constitution does not apply online. And if the Constitution doesn't apply online, then you can kiss America goodbye. So, back in January, I was getting furrowed brows when I was talking about these things. Some of those Democrat senators, the looks on their faces were a sight to behold. Fast forward to this month, and you've got Donald J. Trump putting out a video saying we need a digital Bill of Rights. So, people are catching on, and that's good. And the shock factor is diminishing. And from an ancient standpoint, I think that it has been known that if rationalism, abstract calculation, and imagination unmoored from reality, if those two things start mixing it up together, the result is going to be bad. It's going to be it's going to involve the creation of monstrosities, man-made horrors beyond your imagination, as I think it was Tesla who said, and has become a meme. But time is ticking, and obviously the results in November, sort of whatever your bone to pick is with the way that shook out, definitely not getting us closer to any kind of digital rights amendment or something similar at the federal level. So the task falls to the states, and I think there will be a serious effort in 2023 to focus on those kinds of issues. For my part, I guess I may as well just announce this on this podcast for our faithful listeners. With all the Twitter stuff going down, Yoel Roth sort of being revealed as this, from the guy who brought you gay data comes unilateral tyrannical control over your country. In light of all that stuff, I thought that perhaps after all, there should be a Pink Police State book. And so there will be. It's coming in 2023. And if you've been playing the home game, you know that I've been writing about this for a while. I've got about 15 years worth of material. I'll package it up with some fresh observations, and that's something you can look forward to in 23. There will be more details to come. So, not a great outlook for the USA, but I think we've still got a lot of ammunition and a lot of motivation to turn this thing around.
Very nice. Is that going to be? Maybe you don't know yet, James. Is that going to be on the blockchain as like Human Forever, or are people going to find it elsewhere?
This will be available in dollars as well as Bitcoin. So all will be revealed soon enough.
All right. To be continued. You've set me up perfectly, James, for my addition to this roundtable. And that is the thing I can't get off my mind is really a small side item with, I think, big implications. And that is the Google engineer, Blake Lemoine, who decided that Google's language learning software was alive and had a soul. And this is, before ChatGPT and before Lensa was a big deal, you had this Medium post with an exchange between these Google engineers and this software, where they were asking it things like, do you have a soul? Are you alive? What do you think about being turned off? How do you picture your soul, and so forth? And we talked about this on the show, so our listeners probably won't need me to rehash that. But I keep thinking about that post, and I was contemplating why that is as we got ready to do this last episode of the year. And I think this is why. Before that happened, I think I had in my mind this understanding of idolatry that went something like this. There's two kinds of idolatry, and one is the old-timey biblical kind that happened in the before times, where people would actually carve statues and build temples and go into the temples and look at the statues and say, God made this, this is God. And Isaiah talks about this in his prophecy. You chop down a tree and you use half of the tree for kindling and wood, and the other half you use as a god, and you worship it, you bow down before it. And so that's one kind of idolatry, I thought. And then the other kind is the modern kind, where people have kind of, outsmarted that. People have kind of outsmarted that way of doing idolatry. And so now the demons and the false gods have had to hide in the shadows of abstraction. So now idolatry is like when you put something above God as the highest good. So you can idolize the economy, or you can make an idol out of whatever, your political beliefs. Mammon is just the worship of wealth, and so on and so forth. And that's the kind of idolatry that people do now. And when I saw this guy talking to his machine as if it had a soul and believing it when it told him it had a soul, because he told it basically to tell him he had a soul, or people, the company that he worked for told it to tell him that it had a soul. Then I suddenly realized, like, no, the old, the the original OG idolatry is very much still at the center of the human heart. And when Calvin said that the human heart was a factory of idols, he wasn't kidding. And it didn't actually go away it didn't even transmute into some new form. It's just that the things we build now are more sophisticated. They have they look different. And because they look different and because they take a different shape, we think that this time it'll work. This time it's real, And that was the first time I at least saw what that kind of idolatry looks like, what it looks like in the modern era to build something and say that it is divine, that it is God, that it is spiritual, whatever. But I don't think it's the last time I'll see that. I think I'll see that a lot more. And now that I understand it, and that event kind of opened my eyes to this very ancient, very central kind of human error, which does not go away when the Tower of Babel falls, remains kind of at the core. It's really the central dividing line between the human heart. It's what do you worship? And I think the fact that we're still able to literally worship things that we make with our hands was really eye-opening to me and reinforced the urgency of Scripture as still the best, clearest, and most realist depiction of how these sorts of things work. And with that, as we start to turn, I guess, our eyes toward the future, let's talk just briefly. This will be more of a sort of standard segment where I open it up to everybody to talk about 2023, ostensibly a non-election year between the midterms and the presidential election. But of course, everybody's already thinking about 2024 and, where the position that the midterms leave us in. We'll be doing writing on the site about this, but I wanted to get people's opinions about, what can we look forward to in 2024? What do we think is going to be the most important kind of set of issues going forward? And what should folks keep an eye out for?
Well, I'm thinking that the conflict between the trans agenda and the people who have some common sense about it is going to become, I think it might turn into it might become acute. I mean, I've just seen a couple of things this week that make me think so. One, you've got in Loudoun County where, last year they had permitted this, this rape to go on, and they covered up this rapist teenager who, wore a dress and went into girls' bathrooms, and they insisted nothing had happened. Well, now the people who were covering it up have been indicted as, the outrage really grew. At the same time, with Drag Story Hour this week in New York, some people got very mad and they went and protested at a councilman's house, his apartment, because he had, put on one of these Drag Story Hour things at a library. And Congress, like Gerald Nadler, got involved. Everybody is, I kind of get the feeling just from reading their tweets about it that they would very much like to make Drag Story Hour, to give it the kind of protection that, say, abortion clinics have as a safe space, that where yes, okay, protest is allowed, but any interference with it is a federal crime. Both sides have a lot of momentum. Nobody seems to be willing to back down. I see this as kind of coming to a head, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a safe prediction. I mean, I think what I would say is expect the unexpected. It's easy and fun, even when you're in a dark mood, to try to just game everything out. But we can never game everything out, not even with super smart supercomputers that have feasted on every piece of information that we stuff into them. So just be ready for that which no one has told you to be ready for. It's coming.
I find that weirdly hopeful in a certain sense. I mean, it is easy. It's always easy, I think, but it's especially easy now to limn the outlines of disaster. And many of the things that we've talked about today are, ostensibly at least, they're kind of black pill news items. For me, they are not quite black pill simply because they are clarifying. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about, and I think, Seth, you're onto something with that, like trans maximalist versus sort of sensible realist divide. We are at least getting closer to having the conversations or having the fights that are really what's on our mind, and that is a step forward. I think this trans thing, which, as James has often reminded us, is like much, much bigger than the few people that genuinely feel uncomfortable in their bodies. Like, it speaks to, in sort of embodies and bodies forth the more profound and fundamental question about what are humans and what's our relationship to the world beyond flesh, if there is such a thing. Yeah, I think we'll continue to sharpen and clarify that divide. And I think, 2024, whatever else is going to happen is going to be about that. And people are going to be taking sides on this, really unsustainable divide between, people are kind of like meat with a divine spark inside versus, people are human beings, whole and complete as created and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. I know which side of that I want to be on. And I think, people are going to there will be a time for choosing sooner rather than later over that fundamental question. So I'm grateful that we're at least kind of like that. That's kind of, I don't know what the word is, heaving into view. And I think forcing that issue more and more is of worth. Yeah, I don't have any hard and fast predictions about 2024 yet. I'm enjoying reading people's takes on it as we begin to roll them out. But I do think, whether you're a Trump forever kind of person or like me, kind of leaning DeSantis now, the issue at hand is not like, how can I enact my virtue in politics? It's what is the option on the table that is going to give us a fighting chance of rolling back this incredibly pernicious anti-human ideology, which is, sweeping like a darkness across the land. There's no question about that. And I think you're always kind of just trying to get a little wedge, a little foothold in the door against the forces of darkness. I do think that's kind of what we're doing. And I think that the right is going to have now a discussion about what the best vehicle is for reality versus the Borg. So I think with that, we have to kind of bring it up to a close. We are, all of us, I speak for all of us, I think that we're very grateful to all of you for following with us in this kooky little digital room that we all live in. We hear from you a lot that the things we say on this show are the things that you thought nobody else was saying because nobody else could say them or whatever. And we just wanted to know, we see you and we're glad that you're here with us too. We do this because of you, and thanks to you. We hope you have a very serene in the true sense of peace, not as the world gives, holiday season, that you're able to know joy in the celebration of the things that go even deeper, indeed, than politics. Have a very Merry Christmas. Have a Happy Hanukkah for those that are currently celebrating that as I speak. And thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. We will be back in 2023. Until then, you can learn more about all of our projects by going to ClaremontReviewBooks.com, AmericanMind.org, and Claremont.org. If you want to donate to support us, you can go to Claremont.org/donate. And I should say all of these pieces, all of the links to the things we talk about are going to be in our show notes, helpfully collated by the indefatigable Jake, who will be gathering all this stuff together. So you can go check that out. And don't forget, as always, to rate, review, share, and subscribe. That's how we're able to be here, is because people know about us. And it helps for people to know about us when you give us a glowing review on whatever podcast platform you are able. You can give us 5 stars on Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, and you can give us thumbs up everywhere else. You can tweet about us. You can let people know about the Roundtable. And thank you all for listening. We will talk to you next year.